today's panel discussion entitled Communicating IT Service Changes, Intersection of Communication and Change Management. I'll ask the panelists 5 questions. After the panelists have had an opportunity to answer the question, we'll move on to the next one. There will be time left over at the end for Q&A after the last question. Everyone will be on mute. Please use the chat window to ask questions. I'll be monitoring the chat window as questions come in. Please include your name and your institution. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the wiki site within 5 business days. Did you hit record for me, Katie?
Yes, I did.
Oh, thank you very much. So it is being recorded. So we're extremely honored to have with us today a panel of 4 distinguished service management and communication professionals. So here's quickly some of the objectives that we're hoping to accomplish today. The first presenter is Katie Rose, Senior Director, User Services of Notre Dame. Email addresses are included if you want to do follow-up. The second presenter is Stan North Martin. He's a Senior Director of Outreach, Communications, and Consulting at NC State University. Our third panelist is Paul Reeves, Communications and Training Specialist, Georgia Southern University. And our final panelist is Beth Rugg. She's the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Client Engagement at UNC Charlotte. All right, without further ado, I'll jump into the first question. The first question is, does your communication strategy vary depending on the change type? So normal high-risk changes or standard changes, or by other factors like audience, lead time, service impacting or non-impacting?
So I'll take that one, Mitch. At Notre Dame, when we have people fill out a change form, we ask a lot of the questions that help us determine who we need to be communicating to, at what point in the process do we need to communicate with them. And kind of the very high level breakdown we have is on most minor changes that we have. We do very little or very informal communication. At most, it's usually the developer working directly with somebody in the office that would be affected by that change. And then on the major changes that we have, we do a variety of different kinds of communications, everything from a month ahead of time, starting to tell people that things will be unavailable across the campus using a variety of mechanisms like email, our internal campus portal, social media. Sometimes we'll have the opportunity to use specifically targeted lists for people who will be affected directly by that change, and we try to take advantage of that. And we also try to make sure in all of those cases that at a minimum they're getting a week's notice, preferably to any of those major level changes.
Great. Anybody else have a communication strategy that varies?
Well, at Georgia Southern, we certainly do. There are some things that are small in terms of scope that we try to target the specific audience. So depending on what it is, we will change the timing, and we'll change the channels that we are using, depending on that. And of course, if it's students, that's a difficult constituency sometimes to get in touch with. So we'll try to get creative. They're not always the same for contacting students.
I think ours. Oh.
Okay, please.
I think ours is relatively similar to what Katie described at Notre Dame. It really does vary significantly depending upon the change, and the lead time then would also vary as well. For our minor changes, it really is dependent upon the person who is facilitating the change, whether it's a sysadmin or somebody else in the technical staff, to do the majority of that communication internally with the team as well as with the constituents who are going to be impacted. So it's not really until it's more significant changes that our communications folks generally get involved. Although our help desk may help craft some messages or things like that, if we're asked to.
It sounds like the
Beth,
commonality is. I was going to say, it sounds like the commonality is that depending on the risk and who's impacted, your change strategy will be more aggressive or vary.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Beth,
Mitch, this is Beth. I just had one other thing that I wanted to add. Early on, from a communication strategy standpoint, for the important communications, so those usually around standard changes or those with high visibility and high impact, we actually make sure that there's a personal signature if we're using direct email, because we wanted to make IT more approachable. So instead of just sending it from a generic information technology services account, we actually have someone's signature on it, whether it be the CIO's, whether it be my signature, or our communications coordinator's signature.
Pardon me for interrupting for a minute. I don't know, Beth, if you saw, or Katie, if you saw this message, people are trying to go to the old link. There's about 100 people in that queue waiting to attend the meeting.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I love to have that problem, but hopefully we can, there's a lot of excitement generated around this webinar, which is great. Maybe we can take a minute to see if we can Justin help us resolve this?
If we can put the link into this one.
Would that work if we added the link?
If we put the link into the, Justin said he's not in the meeting any longer, so.
We just jumped up. We're jumping up by an incredible amount. So it's like, so that's maybe they're getting the information, getting connected. So,
I hope so.
All right, well, so I jumped over, is about, so people are jumping over. Someone posted the link in the previous link, so great. So whoever did that, thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. So what should go into a communication plan when it comes to communicating IT service changes?
Well, and that, kind of like we were saying before, really is going to vary significantly, I think, based upon the level of change that you have. And in our situation, as I was saying earlier, the type of change may just say, okay, let's look at it a little bit here for the situation that we're encountering, and think about who our audiences are. But when I think of more significant change planning or communication planning, I think about more significant or major changes that are taking place. And so we use kind of an outline for our communications planning, and that's when we would pull in our information news services manager and our help desk folks, and potentially even our training folks and things like that, depending upon what type of change we're talking about. And in the document that we'll have a link to here at the end, I've got an outline that talks about, kind of walks through doing a situational analysis with the team, and maybe you have even a subgroup that's focusing specifically on communications as a part of the change management process, and setting up your goals around that. So you're defining, why are we doing this change, and look at that from a larger perspective, and then figure out, okay, who are your audiences and what are your objectives to communicate with each of those audiences, and then work around some of those key messages that you need to generate for those various audiences. And we'll talk a little about some of those ways that we can communicate those messages and get those things across in a bit. But there's a lot of different communication planning tools that are out there. If you Google on them, I have one that we happen to use in our documents that I've shared that you'll see. But from going into the strategies and your key messages, then it's really helpful to have a timeline then that you set up. Like Katie was saying earlier, the timing of the advance notice that you have really is going to be dependent upon the type of change that you're dealing with. If we're rolling out a major overhaul to our ERP environment or things like that, that's going to require a lot more targeted communications with the individuals who are impacted, and therefore more advanced time to do that. So once you've set up those key messages and the groups that you want to talk with and make sure they get the messages out. Having a calendar for communications, timeline to work with that, who's going to be responsible for that. Are there some additional budget pieces that are needed? If you're doing something special in terms of advertising in the student newspaper, or putting together videos, or using other communication methods, you may end up having to go to the till a little bit for that. And then how are you going to measure the effectiveness of your communication, and tying that into the objectives that you set up from the outset. And then, like I said earlier, assigning those roles and responsibilities for who's actually going to be doing that communicating, whether it's the individual the technical teams talking with the communications around the technical folks who are going to be impacted or who are going to be a part of the change process, or the more outward facing communication that's going on. And so I usually think of it, and my team usually deals more with the external formal communications for the external audiences, or the communities that are going to be impacted, more so than the internal messaging for between the change team that's actually working on whatever the service is that's going to be impacted.
Notre Dame works very similarly to Stan. I think that when we think through that communication plan for any particular change, we really focus on coming at that change from the end user perspective, the person who is really going to experience what that change is, to try to figure out what is the right way to communicate with that person, what do they need to know or do, and why are we doing this to them, so that those three things all end up telling us the plan we should enact, and the timeline we need to act upon, even who the message should come from in those cases as well.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Katie, I wanted to reiterate that why is so important. Yes. And it's often one of the most challenging messages to try to construct, to explain something simply so that our customers can understand it.
I totally agree that the why and interpreted in a language that is something that those who are just striving to get a job done, they don't have to understand our language, but we're speaking their language.
Absolutely.
Any other last thoughts on this question before we move on to the next?
I can't emphasize the context around that as well. Like Beth and Katie were saying, that the why really is important. And then, looking at that audience, and because you've got multiple audiences that you have to communicate with, and so that messaging is going to be unique based upon those audiences. Like Paul was saying earlier about reaching students, the messaging that we do for students is significantly different than the messaging that we would do for administration or other staff, and that may be different than what we would do for faculty then as well, in terms of their kind of what they hear. And so like you were saying, Katie, around who is it who's going to be, and what's the perspective that they're going to be coming at it from, and trying to think of it from their perspective.
I have a final comment, Mitch. I have the privilege of our communications coordinator as a non-IT professional, and we feel she's been very successful, and she will tell you herself that she's successful because she's the least technical person on the team. So that if we can get her to the point of understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it, then she can very effectively help us communicate that out. So shout out to Shelley. I think she's on the webinar, but having a technical person is very important.
Yeah, definitely good to have those resources. As Katie typed in the chat window, just a reminder that there will be a bunch of resources on the slide deck that will be available to you as part of the recording. So I encourage you to take a look at those. All right, let's move on to the next question. What channels or methods of communication are at your disposal, and what has been the most effective, and in what cases?
Well, Let me address that. Here at Georgia Southern, we have several channels. We've tried lots of different ones and have had to refine them as the time has gone by. We have students being the most challenging. We have our portal that we use messages there. Supposedly, they're going in to the portal often and are responsible for what's there. So that's really our main method of getting in touch with students. But I do have a really nice relationship with the Dean of Students office, so that if I need to get something very important to students, they will be very important partners. And that is a channel that we use very sparingly, because of the when the students get something from the Dean of Students, that's usually something of great importance. But for our faculty and staff, we have an all hands channel that is really the only one we have, with a couple of exceptions. So we're very careful not to flood that channel with things. So the idea is to find the channels that are most directed and most carefully targeted for the particular constituency. We have our student information systems. We use Illusion Banner, and so we have a group of people who make up that. And if we have a problem with Banner, that targeted audience is who we go for. And within IT itself, we've got a couple of channels that we have developed. One we just call Heads Up. One that is, if something is going on that maybe it's an upcoming bit of maintenance, or there's some changes going on, but it's not impacting anyone but IT or very few people, we'll use that channel to have a back channel, so to speak, within IT itself. And one that's called Downtime. That is really the chat channel that our technicians use. The thing that we are struggling with now, we're going through a consolidation with another local university in our area, and there are massive changes going on. As you can understand, when you're melding two institutions into a new one, everything's gone and you're having to do everything new. And so we have some significant challenges from that. So I'm interested in hearing from the other panelists. Have you ever gone through something similar to that, or do you have experience where you had to start from scratch?
We didn't start from scratch, and we haven't done a merge with another organization, with another outside university. But we had a merger about 10 years ago with our central IT organizations, our administrative groups and our academic groups, and had to do some kind of coming together around our communications channels and how we were going to standardize some things there. And so that was definitely one of those challenges. So I feel your pain, Paul, in terms of bringing those things together. But yeah, in addition to the email list that Paul referred to, we have a tool called our System News tool that is a website that people can go to and that we encourage people to go to. But it also is kind of the place where it's the originating place for our email then that goes out on our System News emails. And people can subscribe to that. We encourage people to subscribe to that list. There's an RSS feed that comes out of there. And then if you're within the NCSU, you've got access to more of the technical details. And so there's a kind of the public message, and there's the private message that we work with then as well. In addition to email, then we've got a newsletter that we send out. A lot of our IT folks are on Slack. And so there's a lot of communications among the IT community on that. We use we use Twitter, and for both the system news as well as our general OIT news. And we do use some digital signage. But then if we're getting into more larger changes, we'll do everything from print publications and postcard size handouts that have been very effective for our 2FA change, moving to those kind of things that we hand out when we're at tabling events or things like that. Workshops, videos, PSAs on our campus radio stations, and then certainly going out and meeting people where they're at, going going and talking with the business leads or the HR connections people when we're going to make a major change to the HR system or to the financial system. That's a huge area that they can then help us, basically, because we're so decentralized, help disseminate those messages then. Because we're not going to be able to reach everybody ourselves. We really do rely on the community to help us get our messages across. And we've done little tchotchkes and so on as well, handouts for our 2FA thing. We did Post-it notes, which have been very successful as a handout, and it talks about the 2FA site and things like that. So that's not so much for system changes necessarily, but other kinds of environmental changes that they're going to be encountering. And we've even had some contests around that to say, hey, the first person who works with the new change, whatever it is, may be entered, or the people entered into win a prize or something along those lines. So I'll let somebody else add in here.
I just wanted to highlight, of course, we've used all those channels as well, and it does vary depending on what's going on and what the message is. We still do rely heavily on direct email, but a couple of things we've tried over the last couple of years are in the email, because obviously the shorter, the simpler, the better. So we've tried it where we link to a news item on our website, and then we can look at Google Analytics to get a sense of how people are responding to that message. And most recently, we're using a mass marketing tool, iContact, and the goal is a big, pretty picture and a few sentences, and we're seeing like a 50% open rate for those types of messages. So, we're seeing a lot of success for that, because we just, like you say, we just need somebody to see the message. Hopefully it's relevant. If it's pretty and it's short, they're more than likely read it. We also use digital signage a lot, especially when we're trying to create awareness. So for the Office 365, the free software for students, for the two-factor, just for some more of the security information, we use digital signage for that.
Notre Dame is very similar. We tend to be heavily email-based. We've found more success on reaching the students, though, through the social media platforms. And for us, at least, Twitter seems to be the more reliable option to reach most of the students. And then in addition to that, we've also started putting up background images and screensaver images in our shared computing labs on campus. And that seems to also help grab the attention of the students. They are more apt to notice it when they're sitting there right in front of it. And so we found those to be excellent ways to grab their attention. In terms of reaching the faculty, that tends to be one of our more difficult groups to get their attention. And we found that using those departmental contacts out in the colleges who are vested in IT in some way, whether it's just something they care about or it really is their job, that tends to be the most reliable way to get them information about changes they are affected by. And it looks like Katie has a question in the chat about how we gain social media followers there. For us at Notre Dame, one of the things we do is actually sidewalk chalk, and we advertise it via our sidewalks as the students arrive on campus at the beginning of the fall semester. And that's our biggest addition to our followership, is during that week. We gain another 1,000 followers usually.
So this next question, I think, is very timely for those organizations that are looking at resources for communication and maybe going through a transformation or reorg. So in your organizations, who's in charge of communications? And if you have a dedicated team, where do they sit in the org chart?
Hey, Mitch, I'll take that. So in 2015, we hired our first full-time communication coordinator for Central ITS. And this position is a part of my team, which is the client engagement team. We thought it was really important for the position to be situated there, because that's our job, is outreach. It's all the frontline, first and second tier support, as well as training and documentation is on my team. So there's a really nice synergy that happens when all of those people are working together. And then our communications coordinator, she attends our change management meetings, and she actively works with the project manager so that she's involved in coming up with the communication plans for any initiatives and new projects that we're launching. So I can say we have a team now because her team now involves a student graphic designer, because we found once we got the actual kind of text messages down and we could have a way to template them and to provide consistency and standardization, then we just needed some more ways to make our messaging more visually appealing and more interesting. So we were not able to get another full-time staff member yet, although I've not lost hope, but we've been able to leverage a student intern for that. And that's been really successful. One of the challenges we found early on was, the first job description, we wanted that person who could communicate in all channels, as well as design all the graphics that would support those communications. And that's just not realistic for one person to be able to be an expert in all of those areas. It is important, I think, that whoever you get on your team has a sense of design and is able to do some pretty standard use some standard visual design skills. But when you want to take it up a notch beyond, some of the simpler tools to use, and it really is helpful to have somebody whose sole focus is graphic design. One other thing I wanted to mention as far as who is in charge of communications, we do have one communications coordinator, but early on we agreed that any message that would go out to all faculty, staff, all students, or let's say a fairly large constituent group, the CIO would have to sign off on that. We learned that the hard way, as you can imagine, where the CIO saw a message coming out that he was not aware of. So I would recommend having that discussion to try to identify who, especially for those big messages, who's giving their final approval on that.
So at Notre Dame, our communications team as well as our change management team both report through my division. I have one person working on change management, and then I have one person focused on communications and a half-time designer. And so they spend a lot of time together crafting those messages for a variety of uses. Similar to what Beth said, when we have those really big change announcements. So for instance, we are in the midst of moving our shared network storage from an on-premise system here at Notre Dame to the cloud. And that initial change message that said, hey, this is coming, came from our CIO. The follow-up messaging that we're doing on more of the detail and not so much that strategy focus is coming from our generic OIT account or from the IT contacts that they have in the departments that are using information we're feeding them. And so it's really all driven by these two teams that are coming together and then leveraging all of those different contacts to send those messages out at the right times.
So at NC State, our information news services manager reports to me, and I head up the outreach communications and consulting group, and we work really, really closely with our technology support services team, which includes the help desk and our classroom technology groups and our managed desktop groups, and also increasingly with our security and compliance folks, because we do an awful lot of messaging around security, obviously, as everybody does these days. And the security and compliance group also has our project management office, and so we do a lot of correspondence there. The trainers are in my team as well, and so obviously we leverage that. And one of our trainers is half-time training, half-time graphic design person as well. And then we have some student interns that help with some of our communications pieces as well. We had and we have a technical communications specialist that works specifically on some of our web documentation and some of those kind of things. And so we use him as an editor. He's part-time as well. So we try to get multiple sets of eyes on it. And like Beth and Katie said, yeah, if there's major messages, those will generally be coming either from the CIO or from our CISO, or at least their eyes will have seen it and signed off on it. in terms of the messaging that we send out. You're muted, Paul.
Yes, I was. Thank you. I thought I punched it. Sorry. I was saying that here at Georgia Southern, there's really two of us. One that handles the promotional side of communication, and she has some significant. And I've got a phone ringing, of course, right here in my ear. But she has significant design skills. I do mainly the operational communications and training. So we split it that way. And I've got to catch this phone, folks.
One thing I just wanted to highlight, I know we've focused a lot on operational change, right, technical changes, but certainly communications coordinators or people can be very effective when you're communicating organizational change, right? And I actually, you know, I was proud this week because somebody came to me and said, so we're making this movement regarding organizational change. Can so-and-so help craft the message? And I was like, oh, the seeds, they're growing, right? We're understanding that it is important to try to organize a message and to a certain extent control the message because, you know, people start talking. So it's, you know, I've just found it's best if you can try to give them all the talking points through some kind of centralized message, whether it be operational change or organizational change.
Yeah, Beth, I think it's so important. USC has really recently embraced OCM, Organizational Change Management. And for any major changes or large initiatives, we have OCM resources that we can leverage as part of the project planning and then ultimately the release and communication and training and all that stuff. So very, very effective when it's used correctly and in the right way. Just to level set, can you, each of you, give the audience how many students and how many faculty and staff? And the related question is, can you scale your communication strategy if you're a small or a large institution? Because there may be people on the call with very large institutions, and they're like, well, we can't do half of the things that you're doing because of the size that we are.
I mean, we're at 29,000 students, 4,000 faculty, staff, 125 central IT, 150 distributed IT, and I have one communications coordinator and a student intern.
Okay.
We're at NC State, we're at about 34,000 students. We've got about 85 to 9,000 faculty and staff. Within central IT, we have about 270 or so. Distributed IT out on campus, well over 300, about 350, something in that neighborhood. And yeah, and as I said, one full-time person and then several part-times and some student help and designer.
Well, Georgia Southern is 27 or so thousand now, and it's because of the consolidation. Those numbers are kind of hard to come by. Not sure exactly how many faculty we have now. It's something along the lines of 2,600, as I recall. Maybe it's a little bit more than that. We only have 130 or so in IT. And I say only because we're distributed and central IT, all those numbers. And so it's a little bit like the same size as what Beth was talking about. And one operational communications person, and then, of course, our other individuals. So very similar size.
Notre Dame has approximately 11,000 students between undergrads and grads and 5,000 faculty staff. We've got about 260 people here in the central IT group and another 100-ish out in distributed positions on campus. I've got one communications person, a half-time designer, and one change manager. So it can definitely be done with a variety of sized schools here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I would argue that it's so important. This aspect of communication is so important. If you don't have a lot of human resources but are serving large populations, you just need to effectively prioritize what you care about the most and go after that. Really, you know, what kind of communication can you do that's going to have the biggest return on your investment?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's move on to our last question, then we'll get into the Q&A session. So you've sent all this communication out. How do you know if you're being effective? So how do you measure the effectiveness of your communication, and what tools are you using to measure the effectiveness?
So I'll take that one, Mitch. It sounds like when you first start, I think one of the easiest ways to know if you're effective or not is how many calls is your help desk getting after you've made a change? And hopefully that number is small, but that's not really the best way to measure the effectiveness because oftentimes those changes could result in just general questions regardless of whether you communicated effectively or not. So like Beth had mentioned earlier, a lot of us that are relying on email heavily for communications are starting to use more of these real marketing email tools that offer you a variety of measures to know whether someone is even opening your message, whether they're clicking any links in it, which links they're clicking, and are they looking at it multiple times even. Those can be very helpful. I think the other thing that Notre Dame has done that has helped us really know that the campus is hearing what we're saying and appreciates it is as part of a campus-wide services survey. So where they ask, how is IT doing? How is food services doing? How is HR doing? One of the questions that they included this year for us, because we specifically asked for it, was, are you getting the right IT information when you need it, when you're affected by things? And we got a fantastic rating. Out of 10 points, they gave us an 8.6. So we were super pleased, and it helped us know that the steps we're taking and the methodology we're using to know who to communicate with when is really actually delivering what campus needs.
I'm very envious, Katie.
I like to brag a little.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're using Bronto for our OIT news articles that go out, and we recently converted to that. We also use link shorteners for a lot of our communications, and that tells us what kind of hit counts we're getting on those particular links. And so those can be just standard email messages that we're standing out without going through some of the service providers. So even if it's going out via a listserv list or something like that, we can do some of that. I will admit we don't do a real good job of measuring the effectiveness, and even going beyond the hit counts is really, are they reading and understanding what it is that you're saying? And some of that, the best feedback we've gotten has been going and having focus groups or talking to, we have for example, our inter-residence council, which is our group of students who live on campus, representatives from all of the different residence halls. And we will meet with them at least once a semester and talk about changes that are coming and also questions that they have, and then ask some questions there. And that's been a good feedback channel there. The other feedback channel that we also oftentimes use are our I said we have a lot more IT folks outside of our central IT than within, is getting feedback from them on our effectiveness of our communications to their constituents. Are we giving you the information that you need to be able to talk to your folks effectively? And they'll let us know if we're not. But it's certainly an area that we can work on, and it's one of the areas that's particularly on the security side of things that is in it's our cybersecurity roadmap, includes gathering metrics to see how are we affecting change in terms of numbers of phishing messages being responded to, or understanding of the importance of 2FA or other kinds of security messages that we're trying to get across, not necessarily specifically around change, but messaging in general.
I just want to mention, I think something that hasn't been quite mentioned yet. It's more of an indirect metrics, but it's more related to the service management side of the house. So with change, right, we're also heavily invested on FAQs, user self-service, right, providing information and documentation so that one can get help on their own. So when we started kind of this journey about 4 years ago when I came here, I used to get hit with rationale, well, we need more staff because we're doing more, we're changing things more. My response was, well, no, change doesn't necessarily equal increased volume at the service desk. If you do it well, if you communicate it well, if you provide self-service documentation, those things do not necessarily, they're not directly related. So just another metric is, do you have kind of self-service FAQs, and then what are the, page counts or whatever the hits on those FAQs?
Using Google Analytics to see what the search queries are that people are asking about when they are going out and looking is another good thing. And we've done some of that, but we really have not done, we haven't used a lot of those tools that are available as effectively as we could, certainly. But you make a good point, Beth, in terms of the leveraging that knowledge base.
And I saw a question that comes in: who generates your documentation, your communications people or your help desk people? Actually, I have a training and documentation person who would typically be tasked with generating it, although my team is really involved in any kind of piloting, testing, QA work that goes on. So it tends to be an iterative process where one person's tasked with starting it, but then there's lots of reviews that go on. But my service desk team can also create this self-service documentation.
Yeah, I agree with you, Beth. I think here at USC, we're trying to leverage more of the service management tool and bringing people in as a way of communicating to them service changes. If they're, not these high, these major changes where it requires communication to the entire campus, but, it's a certificate expired and now you have to update your certificates, or, we changed, one platform to another. How do we bring people in through self-help, right, knowledge, and pulling them to the content? We're now in actually our Q&A session. We have a number of questions that have come in. So we'll start with Jeremy Pellegrin at Tulane University. And his questions around the second question, which is what should go into communication plan? He's asking, does communication come from a single account with different signatures, or do you have different accounts for like the CIO, the CISO, et cetera?
We use one account, although we change the signatures on it. And that's more just to help with bounce backs and all that kind of thing. But we send it out from one main account.
Notre Dame is very similar in that way, and for that exact reason, so that any responses don't go to any particular individual or a team other than our help desk.
Well, go ahead, Stan. Well, I'll say we actually send our messages from the individual accounts. It's me and the other individual that is part of our team, and that's because of security. We have wanted it to be a particular individual's email, and that sometimes runs counter to what most people do, but that's our implementation. So there's two, and it makes you kind of famous on campus too, good or bad.
We will use what we refer to as generic accounts oftentimes for our most of our mailing. A lot of it depends again on who and what. We have what we refer to as a broadcast service, and that is always coming from one address if it's going out targeted to large populations, faculty, staff, students, or any combination of those. But there are messaging that we'll be doing internally to the IT community that will be coming from individuals. But oftentimes even those will come from an account that is going to then, if it generates a message, it's going to go into a queue, into our service management tool or something to be able to be responded to that way. So it's not just an individual from that. So we're not as consistent across the board. It depends basically on what the message is oftentimes.
Actually leads to the next question here, coming from Carol Myers. She's asking if any of you are using your service management tool for messaging workflow or automating sending of messages or whatnot, tying into your change process.
At Notre Dame, we're actually about to start using it to manage the workflow of the request for the communication, the drafting, the approval of it, but we won't use it to actually send the message.
Yeah, we're not. using our service management tool, although, you know, notes from the front per stands earliest, it is tied into our service management system. So we have, you know, one communication did result in 3,000 tickets being created because of some kind of bounce back loop that got created. So just watch out for that.
Yep.
I think our colleagues at Texas A&M are using a request process to generate, you know, to manage communication workflows. So you might want to reach out to them and see what they're doing.
Makes sense.
All right, Alana from University of Southern California, my coworker, she's asking what social media platforms have you found to be particularly effective in reaching students? And she's also asking you, Katie, how many Twitter followers do you have? I think you actually answered that in the chat. So
I did. We found Twitter to be the best channel to reach our students here at Notre Dame. And at least as of this afternoon, we have 1,729 Twitter followers at Notre Dame. So
we have really only invested in Twitter. We talked about Facebook. We've talked about other, you know, getting into Snapchat or other things like that. And we don't have the personnel to be able to invest in that. And so we actually have had situations where our student help will respond to questions that are coming up on various student-based Facebook channels. That is sometimes good, sometimes bad, because you can't control the messaging there, and so sometimes they get some things wrong. But we've been reluctant, frankly, to use that as a communications avenue because we don't monitor it, and so we don't really want people to go there for their answers. We'd rather push them to our knowledge base, to the resources that we have online and things like that as the place that they're going to go to get that. But I realize that engagement is really important, and we wish we had more resources to be able to do that engagement.
I would say we use our Twitter account. We don't have a large following, but actually it seems to be most effective when there's something unplanned that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for good or for bad. So when an Amazon data center goes down and suddenly they can't access Canvas for an hour and a half midday, you know, Twitter was a great route to try to get that information out there, I think. So we have to grow our following, but it's hard to grow the following if you're not having a lot of outages. Not that I'm bragging, but I kind of am. So
good.
nothing wrong with that. Marian had asked a question about guidance around messages not looking like fish, and Cassandra posted an article on EDUCAUSE site. Does anybody have any additional thoughts around not making your messages look like a phishing campaign?
We've done some work with our university communications folks, because each of our colleges have communicators where we've tried to provide some information around that. But that's definitely a struggle, because there are lots of phishing messages that will take our messages that we've sent out and basically use those as attempts then, and so it's a constant struggle.
Well, and a trap that we've had is just when they're, and again, it doesn't happen a lot, but when something's urgent, so you've got to get a message out there quickly, and you want to say, you know, important, read now, you know, and then it gets picked up by your spam filter, so it never gets delivered. So yes, we have had to learn and educate ourselves as far as the best wording to actually use on important messages so that they don't actually get filtered out. And we do that by just multiple review, people looking at it, especially when there's a very urgent situation taking place.
At Notre Dame, when we send out a message that we think is likely to look more like a fish because of the situation, you know, say even the changes we made when we switched to two-step logins, those situations, we've at least gotten our campus to think critically about, oh, they're sending me to a website that wants me to log in. Something might be weird here. We use those contacts in the department to help get that message out that this is for real. You do need to pay attention to it. It is something that is legitimate, even though it may feel off to you. But we've really tried to follow the guidelines that were in that link from EDUCAUSE that got published in the chat. And we make sure that, you know, we minimize any links we're providing, that we make sure the grammar is good, that the title is meaningful and not panicking, and that that we don't use all caps ever. It's always, you know, if something is important, we boldface it. We do not do caps.
So it sounds like you have a style guide, a communication style guide.
Right.
The last question we got, and people are chatting in the chat window about the different tools that they use. Katie's asking if there's a tool that you use to request and holistically track the communications you are sending out, like a status IO or some of the other tools that have been mentioned.
We use a visual task board within ServiceNow. It's similar to Trello, that we kind of track the workflow right now. As far as system status goes, we actually have a system status built into our main OIT website, and that links out to our Twitter feed that supplies the additional details.
We have a very old tool that we've used. It was generated with CGI and Perl and duct tape and baling wire, I think. We're still using, we're wanting to integrate into our service management tool eventually. But the key there is that it is a locus that we have directed people to, and it includes a mailing list. And there's actually some messaging that we do then because any of our technical staff on campus can get access to be able to post to that, and we do not. We've made a very conscious decision not to say, no, you have to have this message approved or whatever ahead of time. You can only post as the particular units that you're associated with. But we try to provide some guidance for how best to craft that public message and then the information and the technical details so that it is easy to understand for our end users. We've really debated back and forth with that in terms of folks being able to craft those messages themselves versus needing some help. We encourage folks to go through the help desk or through us if they're going to be doing something that's broad-based, because all too often there's stuff that's out there that uses acronyms and things like that the general public isn't going to, okay, well, OIT CPO2 is going to be down. Okay, so what? And everybody's supposed to know what that means. And some of that has come from it being a technical tool, or that was a tool that was initially used for the IT community, and then got pushed out and encouraged the rest of the campus community to go to first as a place for checking whether a service is down or something. So we're still working on that. I'd be curious from the rest of you whether you've had any issues with what you reveal on your messaging and how public it is compared to the level of detail that might be then usable from a hacker.
Well, maybe we could take that conversation to the listserv, right?
Sorry, we're out of time.
No, we are running out of time. This has been a great conversation. This concludes today's panel discussion. This is the slide that has the resources available to you. This session will be recorded. We're going to post it on our wiki site. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your thoughts and your time with us today. There is an event feedback link. If you'll take a moment to click on that and fill out a survey, let us know how we did, what we can improve in our content. The panelists have been kind enough to provide us their contact information. Feel free to reach out to them. We are always looking for new ideas to generate a webinar. If you have anything that you want to share with the group, please send me an email, mpouts@usc.edu. We'll start the conversation. So thank you so much for coming. And thank you again, panelists, for your time. And everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.